Hello and welcome to a new series of Mee Gindys.
And if you're new to the show, it shouldn't take too long to get your head round. It's basically a series where H and I wonder about things around the Isle of Man, about the Isle of Man, in the Isle of Man.
And everything else. In this first series, daffodils, giants and loo rolls. Well, we're back again.
I don't know how, but we are.
No, it's a mystery. Welcome as ever, and thanks to all those who support the podcast as well. Lots of people going out and listening to TMG on the podcast, and the last one we did was the back end of last year. Thousands have been listening to that.
Have you been listening back again?
It's me. I actually listened 4,000 times.
Okay.
Yeah, just
right.
to see how it sounded. But it was lovely, and the one we went round to Ravensdale.
Oh, yes.
Off the scale.
Have you not bought that one yet?
It's been sold.
Oh.
And sadly not to me. The beautiful Ravensdale Castle up in the north of the island off Ballaugh there. Been on the market for a long time, and if you go back onto the podcasts, you can find our walk around about a year ago, I think, when Beth organised a fantastic walk around this beautiful house and gardens. Fascinating. If only we had the money. We didn't, sadly, but we did at least have the pleasure of walking around it. Some lucky person has now bought it, and well, it's up to them what they do with it now, whether it becomes a hotel or another beautiful house. But go and have a listen. Wonderful stuff. In the meantime, though, more new adventures and weird and wonderful things. Pretty much anything goes. Beth Espy at manxradio.com or Howard Kane at manxradio.com if you've got any ideas of weird and wonderful things, or just things you think, I wonder, which is what it's all about, Mee Gindys. I wonder. So what have I been wondering about then?
Well, first of all, we are going to, over the next few weeks, talk about well-known people in the Isle of Man. So those historical figures, perhaps, that you've heard of but maybe don't know the full story about. And there was one that I was particularly interested to start off with, and it's all about somebody who lived in Sulby but actually didn't necessarily live where I thought he did.
I'm Katie King, and I'm the Curator of Art and Social History for Manx National Heritage.
And Katie, we are here today because we want to find out about some of the famous people from the Isle of Man, and we're going to start off with Arthur Cayley. What can you tell us about him?
Well, it's a good choice to start off with. Arthur Cayley is probably one of the most well-known figures on the Isle of Man. He has many names. Arthur Cayley, the Manx Giant, you might know him more as. Born in Sulby in 1824, and then he's got quite a complicated history. But ultimately, he ends up in America and was performing as a giant in a circus act in Barnum Circus. And he performed in a show called The Greatest Show on Earth. And he was performing then as Colonel Ruth Goshen, the Palestinian giant or the Arabian giant. But he has had many names and many personas, and his life is mired with complication, shall we say, including faking his own death in Paris for some insurance money. But more on that.
And we are here next to a cutout, which I have to say we have ascertained is accurate, we think.
Yes, so this is a cutout that Charles Gard had made actually many years ago of a life-size photograph of Arthur Cayley, or Colonel Ruth Goshen is how he's dressed in this particular image, with his red scarlet coat and his great big hat. And I always thought it was out of proportion, but in fact we got a ladder out and we measured it, and in fact it is 7 foot 11 inches, which is what he was claiming to be in terms of height, or what Barnum Circus claimed he was. And in some cases they said he was 8 foot, which is very tall, taller than the tallest man today.
I always thought that he lived in the Sulby Glen pub, which is why they have those massive doors. And you say he was born in Sulby, but not necessarily anything to do with that pub?
No, that's been a bit of an urban legend, or a country legend maybe, more accurately. Yeah, so he was born in Sulby, and he was the son of a farmer and was a farmer himself. That's how that's where his life was going. And then when he was in his late teens, early 20s, he didn't stop growing, and he became enormous. And what's unusual about Arthur Cayley in terms of being enormous is that he wasn't just tall, he was also bulky in proportion. So a lot of very, very tall people that might have been classed as giants at the time, they were very tall and thin, but he was very, very bulky and in proportion, and incredibly strong. I think a lot of his act was also about being a strong man. So he in his early 20s, he went to Liverpool and then to London to exhibit himself as a sort of a marvel of nature, I suppose he was being advertised as. And yeah, so the story about the Sulby Glen pub or the Sulby Glen Hotel, we've recently researched that, or I haven't. Some of our researchers have, and that pub was built later than his time on the Isle of Man. Although he was still alive in America, so maybe whoever built the Sulby pub was wanting to capitalise on that story by making the doorways bigger. It certainly has got bigger doorways. And indeed, on the Isle of Man, they were selling Arthur Cayley handprints. We've got a number in the collection. There's one on display in the Museum 100 exhibition. They were selling them. So they were trying to capitalise as a marketing initiative. Ooh, come and see the home, the town, the village of Arthur Cayley, the Manx Giant.
Makes sense, I guess. I'm really excited because we are standing next to a rather exciting looking box. And I have the feeling that when we open it, there's going to be all sorts inside. Ooh.
What a cliffhanger that one is.
Really is, isn't it? So more to come from Katie a little bit later. I just want to share something with you
Go
in
ahead.
just a moment.
Which
This is a little book of Laxey, a miscellany of incidents, accidents and hot topics from Manx newspapers from 1793 until 1899. It was compiled and edited by Sue King. And this actually belonged to my father-in-law, who died a couple of months ago, sadly. But I love this book. This is one that if you had it in your collection, you'd keep it in the loo.
I would. It'd be right
Not
next
directly in the toilet.
No, on the
obviously.
shelf,
On
next
the
to the
shelf,
next
yes.
to the
for those
WC.
pondering moments.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, it's just little snippets from newspapers from 1793 to 1899. Some of them are just priceless. So I'm going to flick through. You're going to tell me when to stop, and I'm going to read one at random.
Stop.
Okay. Oh, this is a bit of a sad one, actually.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
This is from the Mona's
Thanks, everybody.
Herald, January the 18th, 1882. Sudden deaths. 2 sudden deaths have occurred in Lonnon during the week. A little fellow named Crane, who was at school last Wednesday, died on Friday morning from brain disease. And Esther Cowell, a widow aged 87 years, was found dead in bed on Saturday morning. She had suffered from heart disease for a long period and was of excitable temperament.
As you are at 87.
Yeah.
I like the phrase little fellow. That
I
sort
know.
of makes it quite
the
sweet, doesn't it?
descriptions in here.
Sad, but...
Oh, yes. The page you picked, actually, is a lot of strong beds of disease, fatal accident leaves orphan children.
chose a good
we'll
one there,
probably
didn't
go
I?
for a more jolly one next time, maybe.
Look for something jolly next week.
But I love that little glimpse into history. It's just fascinating.
Well, yeah, I'm funnily enough as well. I'm hoping in the next a month or two to carry on a little bit with the fantastic work of the late great Terry Kringle with his History Man, and I've been missing it. I don't know whether other people have been. So I thought, as I'm rapidly morphing into Terry Kringle, sort of light, as it were,
but with less swearing.
So far, then I thought, yeah, something along those lines. So I've been working on another little bit exactly like that, going back, digging into some of the papers, maybe taking a topic in the news of late, and then having a just quick rummage round on some of the papers to see how that topic was dealt with or when it's come up again in the 100, 200 years in the past.
Wow. I wonder if something that will crop up in the future that people look back on are our little challenges.
Well, you never know. It's I always enjoy these. Again, anything goes pretty much. The sort of stuff that you might see on YouTube or whatever other social media platform you're on. I mean, it's full of them, isn't it? People doing sometimes dangerous things. We're not going to do anything dangerous. Sometimes just
Not
funny
today.
things, sometimes silly things. And sometimes things you make think, oh, does that work? And one that popped up recently was a chap sort of saying, here we go, I'll show you how to win $1. Or words to that effect. He was American. I think he was. And the idea was, right, if you give someone, like we have here, either a cork or a toilet roll, an empty toilet roll, and you say to them, right, get it to stand on end. Drop it onto the table and get it to stand on end. Is what he said. You see, so he had one like this, or a cork like this. It's not going to work now, of course, but he said it worked every time. It doesn't work every time for me, but there we go. So he said most people sort of say, right, you've got to try and get it on end. So you've got to drop it and get it to stand on its end. And doing it this way is pretty difficult.
Right.
Whereas if you drop it sideways, almost. I'm not going to be able to do it now.
Oh,
Yay.
it did actually work.
Not
Okay.
bad. You just got to get it from the right height.
Oh, twice in a row.
Pretty good, huh? Oh, not quite.
Nice.
And I think it works with corks as well. You see, you sort of drop it on the end, but if you drop it on its side,
Gosh, isn't
What do you
that
reckon?
fascinating?
you reckon that's a good one? You're going to take that down the pub and make a few quid with all
Yeah,
your mates down there?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
and you're pulling off the top of a bottle with your teeth.
Yep.
There you go. I'll leave that one with you. So if you've got, if you're just finishing a loo roll as you're listening to the podcast, keep the loo roll, go into the kitchen and try it on the table. Yeah, do you want to
I'm going to have a quick go. Right, okay. So
you need to
obviously there.
You need to drop it from. That's it. Yay! There you go.
I did it first time.
Pretty good, huh? Almost. Oh,
the
yes.
cork, not so much.
Bit lower, bit higher, bit middle.
We're not playing the flipping play cards, right? Are we?
No, I'd stick with the loo roll.
Right, okay.
I'd stick with the loo roll. You are listening, indeed, of course, to Mee Gindys. What else? The program where you can just wonder about the wonders of life. Right, here we go. Then back to the Sulby Giant and Katie King. Where do we leave it?
On a cliffhanger with a box.
On a cliffhanger with Beth's box.
So we're standing next to a grey box. What have you got in here, Katie?
Well, we've got some belongings, items of clothing that belonged to Arthur Cayley, the Manx Giant, or Colonel Ruth Goshen, a pair of boots and a left shoe. So let me show you what we've got here. So I'm going to open the box.
And you should say you're wearing some protective gloves, presumably to protect the artefacts.
Yeah. So these are leather boots and they are really vulnerable, particularly the left shoe has got a lot of wear. So I'm trying to avoid my oily hands getting onto it. So I'm going to lift it out onto the tissue. So this is the left shoe as worn by the Manx Giant. Now, as I said before, we have had this measured and it is this would be a UK size 19 now, which actually, compared to his scale, is not that enormous, really. There you are.
Wow. Beautifully made, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is actually relatively recent addition to our collection. It was donated by somebody who collects circus memorabilia. So let me put that there, and then I'll show you the boots. The boots have been in our collection a really long time. They were donated in the 1920s, so they're quite an early part of our collection. And I believe I'm right in saying that these were more likely to be from when he was living on the island, for them to have been in our collections for such a long time. So there you are. And it's actually a really fine shoe, so it shows that there was some money in being a circus performer. Certainly someone as magnificent looking.
They are a good size, aren't they? So can we put one of these then, Beth, down next to my size 9s?
I can do that.
And we'll see how big they look in comparison. So let's take a look.
So
we get that down.
That's the right shoe.
So here's that's my size 9.
You are.
And then
Well, comparatively, if you compare your height to Arthur Cayley's, I don't think that shoe is as big as you'd imagine.
I agree.
There will have been leather shrinkage over the years, I suppose, as well.
And if you think, Beth,
Oh.
let's take a look. Oh, that's Beth. Okay. There's 9. What size are you, Beth?
4.
4. And a 19 in the middle.
But like you say, Kate, and this is the thing, isn't it? This is the fascinating thing about history, is that stories are passed down, and particularly from that time, the accuracy can't always be determined, I guess.
No, and I think when we're talking about Arthur Cayley, I think my favourite thing about talking about Arthur Cayley, actually, is his life history is really checkered, and we're even now revealing more bits of information. He's people love learning about him and they love researching him, and we're really fortunate that there's been a book written about him that has unpicked a lot of this very complicated story. Would you like me to tell you a bit of the complication? So he was born in Sulby, as I said before. He was the son of a farmer. He was going to go into that sort of profession, one of 12 children. Then when he continued to grow and grow and grow into his 20s, he went to London to exhibit himself. And he had a manager, Mr. Cannell, I think it was. So he had a Manx manager. And then he went to Paris in his early 20s. And at that point, his mother received a letter saying, unfortunately, he had died in Paris, that his manager, Mr. Cannell, had defrauded him of all his money. There was no money to send back to the family. And that Mr. Cannell was responsible for his death because he wouldn't get him a doctor because he was such a bad man, this Mr. Cannell. That there'd been a funeral, and, very sorry to hear this. And this man was his agent, his French agent. Anyway, some years later, Barnum, the circus legend. Everyone's heard of Barnum and Bailey Circus, I suppose, made popular by that film, The Greatest Showman, isn't it? So it's that era. He appears in New York and says, I've got the world's tallest man, this giant of a man. His name is Colonel Ruth Goshen, the Palestinian giant of Jewish origin. He's travelled to America. Come and meet the tallest man in the world. And here we've got Colonel Ruth Goshen in front of us, and this is the actual photograph that Barnum were putting out. Come and see this huge man. Got another photograph here as well. So this is his calling card, and it does actually say on the back, although you probably can't read it, that it's been issued by Barnum and Bailey's of New York.
You can really see the size in that photograph, can't you?
And what's interesting is, so it says in print, Colonel Ruth Goshen, age 43 years, weight 620 pounds, height 7 foot 11 inches. But over the top, somebody has annotated Arthur Cayley as Colonel Ruth Goshen. So it emerged later in life that he probably faked his own death, or whether his agent coerced him into it, we don't know. Just before he died, £2,000 was taken out, an insurance figure on his life. So the current working theory is that he took the insurance money, went with his French agent to America to start a new life, performing as this character. And in later years, when he was living in New Jersey on a farm, he reportedly admitted that he was actually Arthur Cayley from England or from the Isle of Man. The accounts differ. And then subsequently, some research in the 60s demonstrated that, in fact, one of his sisters, Margaret, emigrated to America, to New York. Margaret Gelling, she was married. She'd married Robert Gelling from the Isle of Man. And he'd actually left some money in his will to a Margaret Gelling. So they must have at some point reunited or found each other. Perhaps she emigrated to America. Loads of people from the Isle of Man were, and saw her brother performing in the show, the brother she believed to have died many, many years ago. So there's lots of stories about him. He had a colourful life in America. He had 3 wives, one of whom was a snake charmer who ran off with a lot of his money, together with his friend, ran off with some money, stole his farm from him, all the bonds to this farm he owned. He subsequently met the sort of chap that ran off with his wife some years later, and he held a pistol to him and said, "Give me my farm back or I'll shoot you." This is
Not so bothered about the wife, no.
Yeah, this is all in the American newspapers. So he certainly had a colourful life, and still to the very end, when he was living in New Jersey, he would travel on this cart pulled by 3 mules, and he'd still be telling the story about how he was born in Israel, how his mother was a lion tamer, all these different stories that he'd tell. He was obviously a raconteur, and somebody that remembers him living in New Jersey recalls that all these circus turns, these circus acts would come and visit him. So they'd have, one example was America's Fattest Lady would travel to this little sleepy town in Middlebush in New Jersey to chat with her old friend. So it had such a colourful life, like a true showman, a performer. And he obviously lived that life as well.
I just wonder what happened to Mr. Cannell, the manager.
Well, I think it's all fictitious. From what I can tell, it's printed in the Manx newspapers. His mother was obviously distraught, and she wrote a letter in the Manx newspapers. You can find it on our iMuseum site, saying, that she'd received this terribly upsetting letter from this agent saying how badly treated he'd been by this Mr. Cannell, and basically warning people of the Isle of Man against this man. But I've not researched this story in great detail, but I've never heard reference of Mr. Cannell again. So whether he was a fictitious person, I don't know. But I do feel for the mother in all this, to be, told her son was dead, and there's no evidence he ever got in touch with the family again, except for this very small bit of information in his will where he clearly knew his sister was living in America, but whether they had met up, we don't know.
And we've seen, I don't know if you've seen up there, Beth, as well, there's the hand, which I think is on there still. There's a print like that or a model like that on the gatepost, isn't, of the house up in Sulby, which we'll go and take a look at some stage, if I can remember how to get there. It's such a long time since I've been.
Be a bit magical mystery tour.
This is a good example of the Isle of Man. So the Isle of Man knew they had this Manx Giant, and yes, okay, in their mind, he died in the 1840s, perhaps, but that did stop them capitalising on it. So these were produced and sold on the Isle of Man as tourist souvenirs. Now it weighs a heck of amount of, it's very heavy. So you wouldn't get that in your EasyJet allowance now, but tourists were buying these and bringing them home as a curiosity. So yeah, we've got at least 6 in our collection, and you do see them coming up for sale every now and then. So they must have been produced on some quantity.
And do we have any indication whether there was an actual cast of his hand done, or whether it's just somebody thought, oh, I know what I'll do?
I have no knowledge of that at all. However, it's definitely a real hand. It's not it's cast off somebody. It's not imaginary, because you can see the lines and marks on it. Whether it's his hand, I don't know.
And where was he actually buried then? Was he buried
in America?
He was
in Middlebush. But presumably there must be a grave in Paris or something in Paris, because he did have a funeral, and the story goes, again, I cannot prove this in any way, but the story goes that there was a massive tree trunk inside his coffin to get the weight. But there is a story about his funeral in Middlebush, in that they found it incredibly difficult to get him out of the house and to build a coffin of the correct size. And that's interesting as well. So when he left the Isle of Man, he was claiming to be 7'6". Barnum's circus were claiming he was 7'11" or 8 foot. But he did seem to be genuinely unusual in that his growth spurt, if you will, came when he was older, when he was in his late teens and early 20s. So perhaps he was a genuine, medical marvel. Perhaps he did continue to grow his whole life. So perhaps he was taller towards the end of his life. So he is very unusual, and I think I've said at the beginning that he is taller than the tallest man today. He was very, very tall for his age, and you can see the way he towers above you if you stand next to that cutout there.
Not so much above me, obviously, but what a fascinating man.
Yeah, he is. He's a great character, and enduringly popular.
Yeah.
The story's enduringly popular.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks very much to Katie King down at MNH there. And if you've had a chance to go down, the cutout is amazing. I thought it was larger than life size, but apparently that is pretty much as he was.
We got the tape measure out and everything. So yeah, like you say, a really fascinating story. I'm a little bit gutted that he didn't actually live in the Sulby Glen, though. I love the fact that I thought the doors were that big to accommodate him, but hey ho.
There is that hand up there somewhere at Sulby on the gatepost.
Yeah, on the gatepost. Yeah,
Katie
sort of
mentioned.
matching one.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. We're going to dip into a bit more from MNH, and that wonderful exhibition is terrific. Well worth going down to see.
It really is.
Really, all sorts of stuff to go down and take a look there. Now then, one of the parts of this programme is our Lucky Dip.
It is. I have been into the archive room just along the corridor from where we are speaking to you now, and I've picked out a CD. I don't know what's on it. It's a suck it and see.
That's what they say. It could be anything. Massive archives there. Right, it's a CD. I've whacked it in the machine. Let's see if it's going to work.
Hello, this is Mike Harewood. Are you a good enough motorcyclist to call yourself a star rider? Star Rider! If you want a real challenge, try the Gold Star course run by the National Star Rider Training Scheme. It's the toughest road riding course there is, and only the best will get through the test. Not only could you save on insurance, but then you could really call yourself a star rider. Star Rider! Find out more from the Star Rider caravan behind the main grandstand.
Look out for Rocket Ron Haslam, Mick Grant and Tony Rutter in this year's TT races. They're fired by NGK spark plugs. Make sure you choose NGK, Britain's top-selling motorcycle spark plug. NGK, the plug for winners.
Andy Mack in the morning, Manx Radio.
Well.
Gosh.
Any idea for it? There is a year written on the back of this CD.
1979?
That's very good. 1980. June the 3rd, Tuesday, June the 3rd, 1980 is what is showing on that. So, yeah, makes you wonder, I must admit. Terrific stuff. You never know what you're going to get when you just dip into the archives like that. And I like that little one. Mike Harewood, the man himself, would you believe?
Incredible, isn't it? Blast from the past, hey?
It is a blast from the past, as was Andy Mack. More next week, of course, one way or another. Next week, we are out and about taking a look at some daffodils.
Yes, we are. It's just the time for it, I think. Blanket of yellow.
It is. Well, I hope it's a blanket yellow. Might be a blanket of white, looking at the weather of late. Whichever the way, we do hope you will join us next week, and when there'll be more Wonderings in Mee Gindys. Until then, mind that snow if it comes, and look after yourselves. Cheerio.
Take care. Bye-bye.